Welcome to the deep dive.
Mhm.
Today, we're going to be looking at, well, excerpts from Gerry Spence's How to Argue and Win Every Time.
Okay.
And, you gave me a really interesting mix here. We've got, like, personal anecdotes,
Yeah.
legal strategies, and even, some kind of philosophical reflections on things.
Right.
So I think this is going to be a pretty interesting ride.
Absolutely. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, through the art of persuasion.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about these excerpts is that, they're not just about winning arguments, like some, courtroom tricks or anything like that. It's really about understanding the deeper psychology of power. How do we as humans judge whether somebody is being authentic? Are they for real? And how can understanding those things help you to win, not just arguments, but in life as well?
Yeah, he throws out this really interesting idea right at the beginning. He says, the power others have over us is often the power we give them.
Hmm.
And it really makes you think, because like he tells this story about being late for dinner with his wife
Mm-hmm.
and how she kind of won the argument
Mm.
without even really arguing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's that she didn't react the way that he expected her to, and Spence admits that, he was carrying some baggage from a previous relationship and he was kind of projecting that onto his wife. But she stayed calm, she stayed understanding, and that completely shifted the power dynamic between them.
Yeah. So for those of you listening, like think about a time when UV felt powerless.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's with a boss, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's family, I don't know. But think about like, are you giving them more power than they actually have by the way that you react to
Huh.
them? And just recognizing that can completely change the way that you approach, any argument, I think.
Yeah, and that leads right into the idea of credibility. Spence says that we're all sort of walking around with these credibility detectors. We're constantly judging, are people being authentic? Are they for real, or are they putting on a show? And the surprising thing is that, Spence argues that vulnerability can actually really boost your credibility.
Yeah, he tells this story about confessing his fear to a jury
What?
during like a huge trial.
Wow.
You would think like that's
Yeah.
showing weakness, right?
But it actually made him more relatable, more human.
Exactly. And by being vulnerable in that way, he disarmed the jury.
Hmm.
They saw him as a real person, as somebody who wasn't putting on a facade. So it's this kind of paradox that sometimes showing your flaws actually makes people trust you more.
That's interesting, yeah. And Spence is he's a master storyteller. He
Yeah.
uses these really vivid examples throughout the book, like the mad judge, who tears into this young lawyer for having a boring legal brief.
And it's like why do stories like that work so well?
Well, I think if you think about your own work or even just your life, can you use a story to make a point that really sticks with people? And it's not about the length of the story. Sometimes a short story is better than a long one. It's about having those elements of emotion and painting a picture with your words. And most importantly, having a clear takeaway.
Mhm.
What do you want people to remember from the story?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And Spence also says, be upfront about what you want. Like, don't be afraid to say it. He actually asked juries for specific amounts of money, which is kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yay.
But why does that work, do you think?
Well, I think transparency can be very disarming. When you're open about your desires, it can make people more receptive to what you're saying. Of course, there's a line between being open and being manipulative. It's about being authentic, it's about being respectful, and not being pushy or forceful.
Yeah, it makes sense. Now, Spence, he faced a lot of prejudice in his career,
Yeah.
right? He was representing clients from all walks of life and obviously dealing with biases in the legal system itself. One story that stood out to me was his experience defending a Louisiana banker who was being accused by black plaintiffs.
Yeah, and that case really forced Spence to confront his own assumptions and recognize that, even good people can have unconscious biases. He had to really try to understand the historical and social context of that situation
Hmm.
and tailor his arguments in a way that would resonate with that specific jury.
Yeah, he says you can't always argue someone out of a deep-seated prejudice with just logic alone, right?
Yeah.
You need to kind of connect on an emotional level.
You do.
Build empathy, show them that you get where they're coming from.
And that's a challenge for all of us, right? Because we all have biases. And Spence's work, I think, is a really good reminder that we need to be checking ourselves, questioning what we assume and really trying to see the world through other people's eyes.
It's so true. And, Spence doesn't just talk about, the words themselves. He really focuses on how you sound. He gives these great examples of Wyoming cowboys, like describing the local sheriff's
Yeah.
intelligence, using like this really colorful, almost musical language.
Yeah, it's about vocal tone, it's about pacing, the pauses that you use. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. Think about a really skilled speaker who can move an audience to tears just by the way that they modulate their voice.
Right. He uses this example of a dozer operator
Hmm.
who's, talking about the emotional toll of clear-cutting forests. And the words themselves are powerful, but it's the emotion in his voice, the pauses, that really kind of hit you in the gut.
It's a good reminder that communication isn't just about conveying information. It's about connecting with people on an emotional level. And sometimes, the most persuasive arguments aren't these fancy words, but just the raw power of the human voice.
Yeah. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. Spence says, argue from your heart and your GT. And he actually suggests exercises like
Hmm.
speaking to the earth. It seems strange, but
Right.
there's a point to it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it might sound unconventional, but what he's saying is that when we bury our emotions, we're actually cutting ourselves off from a source of power.
I see. So he's arguing that by embracing our emotions, we kind of tap into this well of creativity and persuasiveness.
Yeah, it's about letting yourself truly feel and then channeling those feelings into your communication.
And of course, that can be tough, right?
Yeah.
Especially in professional settings where everyone's supposed to be kind of detached and objective.
Right.
But Spence is kind of challenging us to rethink that
He
and to
is.
consider, like, what do we gain by bringing more heart into our interactions?
Exactly.
Yeah, he even encourages readers to try these exercises,
Yeah.
like speaking to the earth or practicing different emotions out loud. It sounds kind of out there, but I don't know, there's something kind of liberating about expressing your feelings without holding back.
Absolutely. And you might be surprised at what you discover about yourself and how you connect with others.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, Spence doesn't just focus on courtrooms and boardrooms, He has a whole section about arguing with kids, and it's full of, uh, you know, wisdom and real-life struggles. Like, he talks about yelling at his baby and feeling regret afterwards and those kinds of, parent-child conflicts we all face.
Yeah, and he makes this really important distinction between arguing to control someone versus arguing to understand them. When we try to control kids through arguments, we're essentially imposing our will on them, and that can build resentment and damage the relationship.
Right. He tells a story about a friend whose son decided to skip college. And instead of, lecturing him or trying to talk him out of it, the father just focused on understanding his son's point of view and supporting his choice, even though he didn't necessarily agree with it.
Yeah, and that's hard to do, but it led to a much more honest and open conversation between them. The father was able to connect with his son and offer support, even without agreeing.
That's a good example. And it's not just for parents, I think. It's for anyone who's dealing with tough conversations, especially with younger people. It's about shifting from kind of wanting to win to wanting to understand, and from imposing your will to building a connection.
And that applies to any relationship, really. When we aim for understanding, not control, we create space for empathy and for finding solutions that actually work for everyone.
That's a good point. And speaking of tough environments, Spence also talks about arguing in the corporate world.
Hmm.
He uses metaphors like the invisible ship to describe how kind of dehumanizing those structures can be.
Hmm.
And he warns about the dangers of blind loyalty.
Right. He points out the ethical dilemmas and the power imbalances that are often present in those kinds of environments where you might feel pressured to, put the company's interests above your own values.
Yeah, he talks about Judge Lord, who we mentioned earlier, who stood up against corporate wrongdoing, even though he was facing pressure from the company itself.
Yeah.
It's a powerful example of, having the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard.
Yeah, and Spence argues that real loyalty at work should come from your own beliefs, your own morals, and not from just blindly obeying orders. He wants us to ask ourselves, who am I in this corporate world, and what values am I willing to fight for?
Yeah, he reminds us that we're not just cogs in a machine, right? We have choices, and we can choose to act on our values. And sometimes that means arguing, challenging the status quo, and fighting for what we believe in.
Absolutely. And he gives examples of, CEOs who are so focused on short-term profits that they ignore the long-term consequences, for their employees, for the environment, even for public safety. He says these leaders are essentially serving their own egos and not the true interests of the company or of society as a whole.
Yeah, Spence is warning us to be careful about blind loyalty, especially in those situations where power is kind of concentrated and where speaking up can be risky.
Right.
He wants us to be skeptical, to question authority, and to
Mm.
speak truth to power,
He does.
even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and ultimately, Spence's book isn't just about winning arguments. It's about being true to yourself and fighting for what you believe in. He argues that real success is about aligning your actions with your values and speaking your truth.
Yeah, he says success is different for everyone, right?
It is.
Some people chase money, some people chase status,
Mm-hmm.
but other people want, meaningful work, strong relationships, a life that feels true to them.
Right.
So it's about kind of defining what success means for you.
Exactly. And Spence's work is a good reminder that we get to decide what success means for us. And we can create a path that reflects our own values, not what society tells us success should look like.
Yeah, and he tells stories about his own struggles, with self-doubt, with feeling pressure to conform.
Yeah.
He talks about finding his own voice and following a path that felt right to him,
Right.
even if it was unconventional.
And his story is a reminder that, real fulfillment comes from being true to ourselves and not from chasing what other people think is important.
So true.
Yeah.
And he talks about the power of choice, in every situation. We can be passive victims, or we can actively shape our own lives. He says real power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your actions.
He wants us to develop that sense of self-reliance, take responsibility for our own lives and embrace the power of choice in every situation.
Yeah. And he also talks about finding joy in the journey, right?
He does.
Approaching life with playfulness and curiosity,
Yeah.
even when things are tough.
He reminds us that life is a journey, not just a destination. And real fulfillment comes from embracing the ups and downs with grace and with humor.
I love that.
Yeah.
And he encourages us to let go of perfection, right?
Yeah.
To embrace the messy, imperfect beauty of being human.
Yeah, his message is really one of hope and empowerment. We all have the potential to live amazing lives, to make a difference in the world, and to find joy in the process.
I agree. He wants us to step into our power, to embrace our authenticity, and to live lives that truly reflect who we are.
Absolutely. So now that we've kind of taken this deep dive into Spence's work, maybe we can kind of break it down into some key takeaways, for our listeners.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So here's a 10-point summary of what we've learned from Gerry Spence. Number one, the power others have over us is often the power we give them through our perceptions. Number two, vulnerability and honesty can be surprisingly powerful tools for building credibility and trust. Number three, compelling storytelling makes arguments memorable and emotionally resonant. Number four, be upfront about what you want, even if it feels uncomfortable. Number five, logic alone is often ineffective against deeply ingrained prejudices. Number six, the sound of your voice and your emotional energy can be just as persuasive as the words you choose. Number seven, don't be afraid to express your feelings authentically. Number eight, when arguing with children, aim for understanding, not control. Number nine, be wary of blind loyalty, especially in corporate settings. And number 10, true success comes from aligning your actions with your values and fighting for what you believe in.
Wow, that's a great list. And I think those principles can really, change how you communicate and how you interact with the world and help you to, navigate life with more confidence and authenticity.
Yeah, it's not just about winning arguments. It's about kind of living a life that feels true to your values, to your passions, to who you really are.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more, we definitely recommend checking out Gerry Spence's book, How to Argue and Win Every Time. It's packed with wisdom and practical advice to help you master persuasion in all parts of your life.
Definitely. And we'll be back soon with part 2 of this deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
One thing that really struck me about Spence is, how he links arguing to living a fulfilling life. It's not just about winning in court or winning at work. It's about this idea of winning at life itself, whatever that means for you.
He's not just talking about like courtroom tactics, right?
Right.
He's getting at something deeper, I think.
Exactly. Spence says that we often give our power away to other people, to authority figures, to societal expectations, even to our own fears and insecurities.
So it's not just about arguing better, it's about understanding, like power itself, right?
Yeah.
What are some examples he gives of that?
Well, he talks about this small town haberdasher, who suddenly becomes president, and he has this immense power, and people treat him differently. It just shows how our perception of power can shift so easily,
Yeah.
based on things like titles or positions.
Right, but Spence is saying that real power isn't given to you. It's something you build from within.
Exactly, through self-awareness, through courage, through living your values.
So how do we actually do that? Like recognize our own power. It sounds kind of abstract.
Well, he says that recognizing your own power can free you from intimidation and fear. It lets you stand up, speak your truth, act on your beliefs, even when it's difficult.
Okay, I can see how that would apply in arguments, but what about in everyday life? Like, what does that look like?
Well, it's about not letting others define you or limit you. It's about owning your choices and your actions.
Right, right. And he also warns about you know, the dangers of seeking power over others. That's right.
He does, yeah. He uses this metaphor of a pistol that fires in both directions. When we use power to control people, we might win in the short term, but we also hurt ourselves in the process. It's a lose-lose situation.
So true power comes from empowering others, not controlling them.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
it's about connection, collaboration, and lifting others up alongside you.
That makes me think about responsibility. Does Spence talk about that at all?
He does, absolutely. He says that real power always comes with responsibility. When you recognize your own power, you have a responsibility to use it wisely, to use it ethically, to use it with compassion.
So it's not just about like personal gain. It's about making a positive impact.
That's a big part of it. Yeah, he talks about, how people in positions of authority often struggle with the weight of responsibility. They worry about misusing their power or making bad decisions.
Well, it makes sense, right? The more power you have, the bigger the potential consequences, both good and bad.
Exactly, but he also says that responsibility is empowering.
Yeah.
It allows you to live with intention, to make choices that reflect your values, and to create a positive impact on the world.
That's inspiring. But does he only talk about this in the context of like people in leadership roles? What about the rest of us?
He says this sense of responsibility applies to everyone in every part of life. We're all responsible for our choices, how we treat others, and the impact that we have.
So even if we don't have, a fancy title or a lot of authority, we still have a responsibility to use our power wisely.
Exactly. And Spence says that by embracing that responsibility, we step into our full potential as human beings. It's not about waiting for permission or waiting for a promotion. It's about owning our power right now.
That's powerful. And it makes me think about something else Spence talks about, which is truth. What does he say about truth?
Well, he acknowledges that truth can be tricky. It's influenced by our perceptions, our beliefs, our experiences.
I can definitely relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like sometimes what I think is true turns out to be totally different from someone else's perspective.
Right. He says that there's no single absolute truth, but rather there are many different viewpoints and interpretations, and he challenges us to question our own assumptions, to be open to different perspectives, and to realize that our version of the truth might not be the only one.
It's like that saying, everyone's a hero in their own story.
Exactly. He wants us to approach truth with humility, knowing that we all have limitations and that
Yeah.
there's always more to learn.
So it's not about like being right all the time. It's about being open to learning and growing.
That's a big part of it, yeah. He also emphasizes being honest with ourselves, recognizing our own biases and being willing to change our minds when presented with new information. It's about being open to being wrong sometimes.
I know that can be hard.
Yeah.
We all like to think we're right.
Of course, yeah. But Spence says we often cling to beliefs that comfort us, even when the evidence suggests otherwise.
It's easier to stick with what we know, even if it's not accurate.
Right. He wants us to have the courage to face our beliefs, to be open to the possibility of being wrong, and to embrace the discomfort that comes with growth and change.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. But I can see how it would make you a better arguer if you're willing to actually listen to other people and potentially change your mind.
Absolutely. He says, how can we persuade others if we're not even open to being persuaded ourselves?
Okay, so Spence talks about truth and the power of being open-minded, but does he give any specific advice for actually arguing a case, whether it's
Well,
in court, at work, or even just at the dinner table?
he does, yeah. One key point he makes is to avoid getting lost in technical jargon or overly complicated language. He says, speak clearly, use vivid imagery or relatable examples, and connect with your audience on an emotional level.
That makes sense. If people can't understand what you're saying, they're not going to be persuaded.
Exactly. He talks about how juries are often more swayed by a good story than by dry legal arguments, and
Hmm.
he encourages lawyers to think like storytellers, to paint pictures with their words and to create narratives that people can connect with.
So it's not just about presenting the facts; it's about presenting them in a way that resonates with people.
Exactly. And this advice applies to any kind of communication, really, whether you're, asking for a raise or trying to convince your kids to eat their vegetables. A well-told story can be way more effective than just a lecture.
Right. Stories make things more memorable, and they help people to understand your point of view. What else does Spence recommend?
He stresses the importance of knowing your audience. You need to understand their values and to tailor your arguments to address their specific concerns.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all
Yeah.
approach, right? You have to adapt your approach depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly. He would spend hours researching potential jurors, trying to understand their backgrounds, their beliefs, their potential biases, and then he would use that information to craft arguments that would resonate with them.
It sounds like a lot of work,
Mhm.
but I can see how it would be effective. You're showing people that you understand them
Mm.
and that
Yeah.
you're speaking to their specific concerns.
Yeah, and this principle applies in any situation where you're trying to persuade someone, whether it's, a marketing campaign, a presentation, or even just a chat with a friend. Understanding their perspective is key.
So knowing your audience is crucial. What about dealing with disagreements? Does Spence have any advice for that?
He warns against attacking your opponent. He says it often backfires and makes you look aggressive. Instead, he would often disarm his opponents by acknowledging their points, conceding when appropriate, and focusing on finding common ground.
That's interesting. It sounds like he's saying it's more effective to be collaborative than combative.
Exactly. By showing respect for the other person's perspective, you create a more open and productive environment where it's easier to find solutions that work for everyone.
So even if you don't completely agree with someone, you can still have a
Yeah.
civil and productive conversation.
Right. And that's important in any relationship, whether it's professional or personal.
Yeah, I agree. What about when you're on the receiving end of an argument? Does Spence have any advice for that situation?
He does, yeah. He says it's crucial to listen carefully, to try to understand the other person's perspective, and to ask clarifying questions. He argues that arguments often come from misunderstandings or misinterpretations.
So sometimes it's not even about disagreeing on the issue itself. It's about not understanding each other's point of view.
Exactly. By listening attentively and asking questions, you can clear up those misunderstandings, figure out what the real issues are, and find solutions that address everyone's needs. It's about getting to the heart of the matter.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like taking a step back and trying to see the bigger picture
Mm.
rather than getting caught up in the details of the argument.
Right. And Spence also reminds us that it's okay to disagree. Conflict is a natural part of human interaction, and it can actually be an opportunity for growth and learning.
I like that perspective. It's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about approaching it in a healthy way.
Right. He encourages us to be curious about disagreements, to see them as a chance to understand different perspectives and to broaden our own understanding of the world.
It's about learning from each other, even when we don't, see eye to eye.
Exactly. And he reminds us that even in heated arguments, it's important to respect the other person, even if we disagree with their views.
So it's not about winning or losing. It's about having a productive and respectful exchange of ideas.
That's a big part of it, yeah.
What about when things get really difficult? Does Spence offer any tips for navigating those really tough conversations?
He does. He says to stay calm, to avoid personal attacks, and to focus on the issues at hand. He suggests using I statements to express your feelings and your needs, rather than, blaming or accusing the other person.
That's good advice. It helps to keep things from getting too heated and personal.
Yeah. Right. He also emphasizes finding common ground. Identifying areas where you agree, and working together to find solutions that meet everyone's needs.
So even in disagreements, there's usually some common ground you can build on.
That's what he's saying. And by focusing on that common ground, you're much more likely to find a resolution that works for everyone.
So Spence's book is full of like practical wisdom that we can use in any area of life.
Absolutely. Whether you're, a lawyer, a parent, or just someone who wants to communicate better, Spence's principles can help you to navigate the complexities of human interaction with more confidence, clarity, and compassion.
I love how he brings together these big ideas about power and truth and responsibility with practical advice for how to communicate effectively. It's a really powerful combination.
He reminds us that arguing isn't just about winning or losing. It's about connecting with others, understanding different viewpoints, and finding solutions that create a more just and harmonious world.
And it's about using our voices to speak our truth, to fight for what we believe in, and to make the world a better place.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into Gerry Spence's How to Argue and Win Every Time, let's hear what stood out to you. What are some of your takeaways from part two?
I'm especially struck by how Spence links argumentation to living a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
It's not just about winning individual arguments. It's about being true to yourself, embracing responsibility, and using your power to make a positive impact.
I agree, and I appreciate his emphasis on knowing your audience, finding common ground, and approaching disagreements with curiosity and respect. It's not about being right all the time. It's about having productive and meaningful conversations that move us forward.
What about you listening? What resonated with you in this part of the deep dive? What are some of Spence's ideas that you might try to to apply in your own life?
We'll be back soon with part 3, where we'll explore Spence's insights on navigating the corporate world and ultimately winning at the game of life. Until then, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
So we're back for the final part of our dive into Gerry Spence's How to Argue and Win Every Time.
Yeah, and in this last part, we're going to tackle some I think tougher stuff.
Right.
Like, what's it like to argue and try to win within a corporation?
Right, because it's a whole different ballgame.
It is. And then also, Spence has this whole thing about what it means to win in life.
Yeah, not just a case.
Right, exactly. So the corporate world, Spence uses this metaphor. He calls it the invisible ship.
Right.
And it's his way of describing how power really works in corporations. It's the system that so often, it ends up putting profits and self-preservation of the company itself ahead of actual people.
It's like we're all in this ship, but
Yeah.
nobody really knows where it's going or what the rules are, and
Yeah.
the power dynamics are always kind of shifting. It's hard to figure out.
It's very hard to navigate. And he says one of the things that people get trapped in is this idea of blind loyalty.
Blind loyalty.
Where questioning anything, rocking the boat at all is seen as being disloyal to the company.
So you feel like you're risking your job, your reputation, everything, if you dare to speak up.
Exactly. And Spence says that blind loyalty can be really, really dangerous, both for you and for the company. It can lead to people doing unethical things. It squashes creativity.
Yeah.
And it creates this culture of fear and silence.
Yeah, no one wants to be the one to speak up and potentially get, pushed out.
Right.
She tells that story about Judge Lord, who we talked about earlier, who was in charge of that case against Kerr McGee for mishandling radioactive materials.
Right, and they put a lot of pressure on him.
Yeah, I mean, they really pressured him to back down, but he refused, and he ruled against them, exposing what they had done.
And Judge Lord is a great example of someone who stood up for what was right, even though it was really hard. It reminds us that our loyalty
Mm.
should be to our own values and to doing the right thing, not to blindly following any company or any authority figure.
So it's about having the courage to speak up, even when it's risky, right?
Exactly. And Spence, he wants us to ask ourselves some tough questions in these situations, like who am I in this company? What are my values? What am I willing to fight for?
So it's about being like self-aware and knowing what you stand for.
Exactly. He reminds us that we're not just cogs in a machine. We have choices.
Mm.
And we can choose to act in a way that matches our own conscience.
Yeah, that's important. And he also talks about, corporate crime
Yeah.
where companies do bad things just to make more money.
Right.
The examples like the Ford Pinto case.
Yeah, where they knowingly sold a car that was dangerous, that could catch fire.
Right. And he said these aren't just like isolated cases.
He says they're not.
They show a system that puts profits ahead of people's safety, their well-being.
Yeah.
And he's challenging us to hold those companies accountable, to demand that they be honest and ethical, and to not be part of systems that hurt people.
And it's a good reminder that power can corrupt.
Yeah,
And we all have a responsibility to speak up when we see things that are wrong.
that's right. Now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Spence's ideas on winning at life. As you mentioned before, he says it's not about, money or status,
Right.
but about living a life that's real, that's meaningful, and that matches your values.
So it's about defining success for yourself, not by what society tells you.
Right, and he talks about how we often, we chase things like approval from others, or trying to meet expectations that might not even be what we want.
Right. It's like we're on a treadmill, always running, but never getting anywhere.
It is, and Spence wants us to look inside ourselves,
He does.
figure out what really matters to us, and then follow a path that feels true, even if it's not, the typical path.
Even if it's unconventional.
Right. It's about being authentic, right? What are some examples he gives of this?
Well, he shares stories from his own life, about times when he had to make tough choices, like leaving a prestigious law firm to start his own practice. And it was a risky move, but he knew it was the right thing for him, and it led to a much more fulfilling career.
That takes courage to walk away from something safe and comfortable, to follow your own path.
It does, and Spence's message is that real success comes from aligning your actions with your values and having the courage to pursue what matters most to you, even if it's challenging.
It's about defining your own success,
Yeah.
not letting other people define it for you.
Exactly.
That's important.
He also talks about the power of choice. We're not just victims of circumstance. We have the power to shape our own lives.
So even when things are tough,
Mm.
we still have choices about how we respond.
Absolutely. He reminds us that even in the face of adversity, we can choose how we show up, how we react, and how we live our lives.
That's empowering.
Yeah.
It means that we're not helpless. We have agency.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Gerry Spence's How to Argue and Win Every Time, think about what we've talked about. How can you apply these principles in your life, in your relationships, at work, in the wider world?
Yeah. What are some of the key things you'll take away and actually put into practice? What changes are you inspired to make?
Remember, arguing isn't just about winning a debate. It's about living a life that's real, that's meaningful, and that makes a difference. It's about using your voice to speak your truth, to fight for what you believe in, and to make the world a more just and compassionate place.
And we hope that this deep dive has given you some new insights and some food for thought. And if you're feeling inspired, we definitely recommend checking out Spence's book.
It's a great book.
It's packed with wisdom and real life stories that can help you master persuasion and create a life that's true to you.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
And remember, keep arguing, but do it with heart, with conviction, and with a genuine desire to make the world a better place. See you next time.